Now it's time for a panel discussion with a few innovators in the blockchain space. We're going to change direction a little bit here and move toward the business end rather than purely the technology end. And the title of this panel is "Can Blockchain Change Business? How and Why?" Joining me today, we have Paula Pettit, who is a serial entrepreneur who's exited her first 2 startups successfully. And I can't tell you the number of startups that I've seen that compare to the ones that actually exit successfully. So that's no small achievement. She's been in the blockchain for the past 3 years and began her journey by co-founding Bitfact, which is a portfolio management tool acquired by Shapeshift. So that's one of the big players in the blockchain space. And now working as head of business development at Linum Labs or Linum Labs?
Linum Labs.
Linum Labs. I still haven't resolved the argument about whether it's Linux or Linux, which is a global blockchain consultant and development company. And I'll come back to her in a minute to ask for a bit more background. David Case is the chief architect of Kronoverse, who you actually would have seen mentioned in my presentation earlier. They're building a platform to bring blockchain gaming to the mainstream with the first release, Crypto Fights, and it's currently in open beta, so you can get in and play it. I've had a crack at it. It's actually jolly good fun. And they've been building on Bitcoin SV since just after the fork, the Bitcoin Cash fork. So I will jump back to Paula and just say, can you tell us a little bit more about Linum Labs?
Yeah.
And what you guys actually do?
Yeah, so we're a blockchain web development agency. So we consult companies on anything that they want to develop related to any blockchain or smart contracts. And we can create quick proof of concepts for them or like a full scale solution. And yeah, we work with all size companies, whether it be like an enterprise company trying to dip their toes into the blockchain space or just a brand new funded founder who needs developers and help to get them off the ground.
Okay. And David, for everyone else's benefit, because I already know, but can you tell us a bit more about Kronoverse?
Sure. So Kronoverse is, I guess, kind of a gaming platform as well as a gaming studio. And we started our company actually building the Crypto Fights product. Well, we started building Crypto Fights about a year before we started the company, actually. And Kronoverse basically aims to provide a platform that developers can easily work within that gives them access to fiat to token conversions and automated agents that interact with actions that happen along on the blockchain, as well as tokenized standards for game items such as weapons and armor and fighters and things like that. And so we're working both on developing the first game on the platform at the same time as we're developing the platform out.
Okay. And for all the real nerds out there like me, it's based on a particular type of die that only the nerds will recognize. Which one is it?
It's the battle system is very Dungeons and Dragons based. So
the D20 system. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Paula, I'll jump to you first. In your position, I imagine you talk to a lot of people doing a lot of different projects, potentially even on a lot of different blockchains. Do you foresee a world where there's going to be many competing blockchains, or do you subscribe to the idea that one is eventually going to kind of become dominant?
I guess it kind of depends. I mean, I feel like the ideal world is either one, blockchain that, anybody can work on. It's become very standardized, or we've created a way for blockchains to communicate really effectively with each other, that then it doesn't really matter if it's built on different blockchains. I think the world that's going to happen in the future will depend on like what companies do, because right now we do have a lot of different enterprise companies building their own internal blockchains, which I do think goes a little bit against the overall mission of blockchain to create kind of a, one transparent place for, all kinds of players to come in. But I do think there is going to have to be some form of communication. I don't think there's going to be multiple major blockchains that can't communicate with each other. I think there will be one or a lot of interconnectivity.
Yeah, interoperability is actually one of the words that I probably use more often than any other in the office. I can see people's eyes glaze over sometimes when I drop that word in a sentence, but I tend to agree with you. It is actually one of the fundamental services that a blockchain can provide.
Mm-hmm.
Common interface, potentially common data storage format, or at least data notarization format. Yeah. So David, I want to jump to you and challenge you a little bit on the value proposition of Kronoverse, or rather the games that Kronoverse creates and builds. Why should I use a game that's attached to a blockchain over any other one? What makes it better?
Well, essentially, what makes it better is every bit of data and every bit of state within the game is all connected to every other bit of data and state in the game. And you end up with kind of a fully auditable history of everything that's ever happened, but in such a way that like state changes within a game, a person taking their turn that, I don't know, attacks someone or whatever, that reflects, I mean, that actually points to where on the blockchain the fighter is defined and what it looks like. And that points to everything it's done in the past. And when it comes to your weapons and armor, you have like full history of everything it's ever done. So rather than just like sitting down and playing a session of a game, as time goes on, you end up with the entire history of everything that's ever happened. And so when you like read fantasy novels and they talk about like this sword that has, whether it be Sting or whatever from Lord of the Rings, like this sword has a history, and it was created it was mined by or smithed by dwarves, whatever, years ago. And it's had all this history of these different activities that it has been part of. And we kind of can bring that to gaming now, such that things can evolve over time and you have full access to the lore of the item. And so when you have maybe a place to buy and sell and trade items, like it isn't just like, okay, here's this sword of truth. This is the one that won this tournament in this year and achieved all these achievements on this quest. And like, you can build in the entire history of everything that's ever happened, and everything is tied to everything else. So it's a very full and complete picture of the entire history of your gaming experience.
So I can imagine a very rich collector market building up on top of the history like that. Yeah.
And then additionally, I mean, you can do cool stuff where as these items are defined and owned by the individual, gaming can actually kind of change that some new game developer can come out and say, okay, CryptoVites has this mechanic that works well, and people have these items that have these type of properties. Let me build some other type of game that can interpret CryptoVites items. And then those items can, I don't know, I mean, basically you can start having this intertwined mesh of not just one gaming world, but it really leads toward the whole like interconnected metaverse of, it's like a whole universe of data for all the games that are built on it, and they can all point to each other's history and each other's rule sets and use those. And when it comes to like modding in the game space of like people coming up with new ideas to tweak a game that's already out there or create a new style that uses things from across the universe, those doors are wide open as well. So
it sounds like there's going to need to be a game attribute standard, as in how do I translate +7 to hit on a D&D sword into some other game with a different system.
Yeah, and I think that those kind of things will evolve. There'll probably be many of them, actually. Like we're probably a long ways off from there being one universe that everyone builds within, but I certainly can see lots and lots of different parallel universes where different shards of logic are all kind of separate from each other, but they've got their whole standards built out that, yeah, I think there'll be lots of different standards that come up, but I also think that's a little ways away still.
Yeah, that would be exciting to see it unfold. Paula, without breaching any client confidences or NDAs and such thing, can you give us an idea of some of the types of projects that Linum consults on?
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of them are under NDA, but one of our easier to explain ones is when we did some work for the Swiss Railway, and we helped them create basically an identity verification on the blockchain for railway workers. So there's all these different railway work companies that come and build on the railway. And if anything goes wrong, they need to be able to track and see who was there, you know, from a very decentralized point of view. So we created using Uport basically a system where where railway workers could go get their identity, and you know, it can be verified quickly that they're verified to be there, and at that point it is saved on the blockchain. So if anything does go wrong, it can be easily tracked, and you know that it has not been tampered with. I mean, a railway crash is a pretty big deal hypothetically. There would be incentive to change that data. So this creates, you know, a tamper-proof application for it. And yeah, so we you know, partnered with them to, you know, go live with that prototype.
There's an incredibly strong appetite out there. I mean, when you talk about applications like that, often people say to me, well, why do you need a blockchain for that? Why not just put it in a database and store it with the government department? One often wonders, why would the government department themselves not be happy with a solution like that? Because surely they can trust themselves. But it turns out they're more worried about other people not trusting them. And so, yeah, I see a huge appetite for this unalterable data, because it just makes it so much easier to trust. So we're going to go a little bit more generic now. I think everybody involved in blockchain, and I'm going to try and use the word blockchain because I know this is not a Bitcoin specific event, but occasionally I will let it slip. So forgive me if I do. I think we all have an interest in seeing it explode and achieve kind of mainstream adoption. And what that means can be many things. It might be that everyone is using blockchain in some application without necessarily realizing that it's there in the back end.
Absolutely.
What key pieces of infrastructure do you think that we're still missing in order for it to really hit the mainstream and serve 7 billion people?
I still think there's just the knowledge that is still very much lacking on a very large industry scale. You know, executives at big enterprises are still a little bit in the dark of how this whole thing works. Sometimes it's still attributed to, you know, more dark net behavior. So there is definitely knowledge, but there's just a couple other things that are still holding it back from explosion. The standardization, I think, is one where it's just easy for companies to come in and build off of it. I think there's still a lot of compliance questions because this industry does move so fast. A lot of people still don't know what they can and can't build, but I'm sure that'll mesh out in the next couple years. And then scalability, I think there's still just you know, some scaling issues that happen with the blockchain. We're all aware of them, but again, I do think that's something that's going to be sifted out in the next couple of years. That's technology. You know, 10, 20 years ago, you needed a whole room to store something that you can now store memory on like this size. So I don't doubt that that's going to come around, but I think the compliance, standardization, and scalability are like the main missing pieces right now.
Okay. I'm going to throw the same question to you, David. I'm going to guess that you're not going to worry too much about scaling.
No, scaling is not really my concern. I think the big thing holding blockchain adoption back right now is simply just getting into it, being able to buy whatever coins or tokens it is that work within your world, and having simple identity validation. That's getting better and better all the time, but just getting people into that world. At the same time, I mean, our platform is largely a user doesn't even know that they're running on a blockchain, except for the marketing buzz that we might put around it, or that the games might put around it. Where, I mean, essentially in our platform, I mean, people deposit fiat with us through a normal payment gateway, and then everything is like tokenized in the background and lives on the blockchain in the background. But that's pretty much transparent to the user. Their gameplay experience doesn't rely on knowing anything about how the blockchain works or anything. And so I think from a wide adoption standpoint, still getting people in is a big hurdle. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of solutions that are starting to come to utilize this technology without making a person know that they're holding on to some asset and worrying about the fluctuating value of that asset or whatever.
Yeah. I think this is actually a really well-recognized problem, particularly in the last couple of years. I've noticed people starting to talk about it as they're actually trying to build applications for people who are not Bitcoin or blockchain obsessives. They're trying to bring in normal people, the other 99.9%, and that's where this kind of onboarding challenge really starts to get highlighted. But I have been really glad to see a lot of creative thought being put into it, and some solutions that quite frankly blew my mind the first time I heard them. One interesting one actually is an application called BitPing, which mirrors the type of service, a service called Uptime, which can monitor websites, but it actually makes use of end user devices. And so these end users actually just can install this app and send out random pings to different websites, and suddenly they're getting paid tiny amounts, but it builds up, and eventually it's enough to be able to make some tips on a social media site or something like that. But that's just one example, I think, of the creative thinking that's going into how to actually get people attached to the blockchain in some sense, and just having a wallet is often a starting point. That's a big hurdle for a lot of people. So, Paula, I've got a question from the audience for you. Someone piqued someone's interest about the Swiss Railway. I've thought about this example on Swiss Railway. How is it implemented regarding personal data of workers? So I think he's asking about how do you protect personal data, GDPR compliance, and that sort of
Yeah, so it did turn out it is a GDPR compliant solution. So the owner of it could verify, the owner of the data, they're always in control of it, so they can decide who gets to see their information and when. And it can also be verified anonymously if it needs to. That comes in with blockchain. You can verify while still protecting the data. So it could go either way. It could be shared anonymously, or they could just decide to share it with whoever was inquiring. But they, at the end of the day, still got the last say.
Okay. And this is what I've wrestled with a few times myself. I've got a couple of ideas, but right to be forgotten, that almost sounds like the antithesis of blockchain. It's once it's written forever. It can't be changed. It can't be deleted. How do you address that sort of issue?
What do you mean exactly? Yeah, I guess once it's written, it can't be deleted. I guess what's the concern here? Sorry.
The right to be forgotten. I can't recall if that comes to you.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's certainly something that's part of recent regulation whose name escapes me. But
for sure. I think that, totally depends on the industry that it's in. I mean, maybe if it's my personal data of what I did on the internet, I think maybe we can work around things, the right to be forgotten. But when it comes to work I did on a railway, I don't know if that right to be forgotten comes into play as much, because, that should probably be tracked.
Yeah. I think, you draw a good distinction between two kind of quite different situations. And I think one of the solutions to this is actually that blockchain does enable you to own your own data and data record, which means that you actually then become responsible for implementing your right to be forgotten, which is in part making sure if you put records on the blockchain that you make sure that they're encrypted in a way that you can permanently revoke access. So I want to move down to the payments use case now, and in particular micropayments, because it was one of the things that Satoshi talked about in the very sort of early days of Bitcoin. So micropayments and frictionless micropayments, this is one of the sort of key potential features of Bitcoin, and several other blockchains have attacked this problem. And by frictionless, we mean low fees, low barriers, whether it be cross-border or whatever. And how can that change the game for business? I think we think a lot about cross-border payments and remittance and stuff like that, but business, how can they take advantage of this?
Yeah. So I think that what he had David said a little bit earlier about, the micropayments that occur that you guys talked about briefly. I do think that is a very cool and interesting application that could, change like the incentivization world in the next, decade or so, because right now it's not really feasible to create micropayments of a couple cents through the current payment platforms. It just goes through too many third parties, the banking, that it's just not really conceivable for a couple cents. But you have Upping, I think you had just mentioned. You have, the Brave browser. You have all these different platforms coming out that pay you such little amounts for, the data and your actions that you do. But obviously over time, this can incentivize certain behavior and add up. So I do think it allows for incentivization of actions that maybe were too small to incentivize before. And give power to users to share their data versus, Google to share the data for you and collect all that money. It allows me to add up what I do.
So filling in, I guess, kind of what I started talking about a little bit earlier that excites me so much about what we can do with micropayments is in the concept of like a game modding world where other developers can just go on and extend different games that are out there. Well, they can build into that maybe a 100th of a cent or a 10th of a cent or something payment actually built into the interactions that they do. So there ends up being kind of these new business opportunities for game developers in our world where they can actually build up new features and their monetization for that is actually just built into using that feature. So if developers decide to put in these little mods or if someone decides to build out kind of a more expansive game world, the developers of those different mods and those different pieces can actually have their business model built right into the value that they're offering and to the logic that they're offering. And so there ends up being this kind of free market for all these tools that can be put out there. And we can have it so that, okay, if you attack with this sword that this other mod put into the system, they get a 1/10 of a cent just every time you use it. And that's just a tiny, tiny amount that you're not really going to feel. It's part of the whole gaming world. But at the same time, we have that ability that just as it's being used, the revenue is automatically captured for it, which is a pretty interesting opportunity.
There's a world of possibilities that have just never been possible before. And I mean, when you have a floor price of a 20 or a 30-cent transaction is probably the minimum viable. It takes a world of possibilities off the table. So I'm fascinated to see what people invent as a result of it being back on the table. So we're talking about the revenue side here, but of course, when you're trying to run any kind of a successful business, you've got to think about the cost side as well. What do you think that Bitcoin can do to make it cheaper to run a business? So I'll start with you, David.
I think at where we're at right now, there's starting to be good development tools that are coming out, but I think right now there still is a pretty high cost of entry just for development teams to get their head around how do I use these tools. I mean, Bitcoin in specific it's a very much a blank slate where you have some really rudimentary tools that give you lots of, they give you lots of different properties that you can take advantage of, but we're not yet at a point where we have any sort of best practices or even really that established practices for how you go about developing things. So I think from a business standpoint, there is still some significant investment that needs to be done in either building the tooling that you need, which obviously is a significant investment, or just getting up to speed, getting your team educated in the different tooling to use. So from that standpoint, I think just getting started, there is probably still some areas that there can be some significant improvements. But other than that, I think just getting adoption, getting people to be familiar and comfortable with what's going on. Like as these different solutions start being built and permeated, I think that as long as we're all still moving forward and developing, I think time is just what it's going to take.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to add a little twist to the question for you, because I think in the consulting space, you probably have visibility of a wide range of business models and ideas. And I'm going to shift the emphasis to efficiencies. What ways have you seen that blockchain can add efficiency to existing business models?
Definitely. One of a really great application is like the international aspect of the blockchain. It's really hard for international companies right now to do transactions or different types of contracts or trades because they don't have an overarching governmental body. It requires quite a bit of trust to ensure that if the contract needs to be enforced, the contract will go through because there's not an overarching enforcement body. But smart contracts and the trustless blockchain system allows for these companies for the first time to maybe enforce their contract via smart contract, transact freely, and work in a more trustless environment. So that's one of the, I think smart contracts in general, like internationally, and then when you do bring it internally, I still think there's some things that still need to be built out, but the idea that once smart contracts are, a main form, you can take out so many middlemen, lawyers, different data keepers, all these different roles that now a smart contract can do automatically, that will improve efficiency so much and remove a lot of middlemen from the process.
Certainly. I think one of the big areas is probably going to be compliance, because automated execution of rules, etc. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can completely remove the human element, because there's still a requirement for audit, etc. But if you can automate so much of that stuff, because the cost of compliance is a huge cost for business these days. Supply chain is another one that I think is going to be huge. I'd like to get some thoughts on stablecoin tokens. It's a pretty kind of hot topic. I don't think it really became a topic until maybe 2015, 2016. But it's generally the idea of fiat as a Bitcoin, as a blockchain token. And some people view this as potentially threatening and competitive to native tokens, but others feel like it's a pathway to mass adoption. Or I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it is absolutely a path to mass adoption. There's so many things, as we've discussed, that blockchain can bring to business, but I don't think they're going to get into that business if you have such a volatile token, such as, Bitcoin or Ethereum as the, backbone of how all these things work. You're not going to have your main enterprise companies signing a deal for a couple million in Ethereum, and then a month later, it's like half the price. So for mass adoption, I think it is completely necessary. So, there has definitely been a couple different ways that, DAI versus Tether, how it's been implemented, and there's definitely better implementations. So I think it is, I think it's necessary, and it's just about creating one that doesn't just mirror our current financial situation, the dollar.
David, are you planning on using any kind of stable coin as part of your offering?
So we're definitely keeping an eye out on different things that are developing, but we're also, for all intents and purposes, essentially we have a stable coin of our own inside the platform, and it's not intended to convey any value outside of the platform, but what it really is when people deposit money with us, we tokenize that money, and it represents the money that is in their account, but at the same time, it essentially becomes our accounting system. So just as the tokens transfer throughout our platform. And when a player pays a fee or wins a reward or whatever, all those things, all those transactions are recorded, again, with that full graph of everything that it actually tied into. And so really that becomes the whole accounting system of, there isn't any worrying about debits and credits to accounts and whatever. It really is, you give us money and we give you this token, and then that token is yours and you hold on to it. And where you spend it and where you, like, when you're done playing, or when you want to cash out, you literally just send those tokens to our cashier, and you get, I mean, it's very much like a poker chips at a casino kind of situation. But at the same time, those tokens directly represent the dollars that you have put in. So for our system, like, we are actively looking at other ways we can use established stable coins outside of our platform, simply because it would be awesome if we didn't have to take that upfront, the know your customer, full validation of who they are. It would be great if people could just bring money in as if it were cash. But at this point, that part is a big hurdle to our customers. And so we're actually kind of building our own stablecoin. But again, it's like, it's almost more of an accounting token than it is a stablecoin, but it's the same exact feature of, there is fiat that is backing these tokens one-to-one, and the token becomes kind of the how we track who owns it and who's owed what.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add on to that. Also, what we were saying earlier about user interface is going to be a big key for mass adoption. So it is very important that, you know, your 99.9% can interact with these interfaces, and they don't necessarily need to know that blockchain is even involved. So for them, they're going to see that their wallet or something has $7, and that should probably be saved in a stable coin, because you don't want them next time to go on and they have 3. Like, there's going to be no explanation to them for that. So yeah, I just wanted to add on that about stablecoin and usability.
I actually had a staff member who was employed in a very, very non-technical role, started at nChain, and I tweeted out her hand cash address, because it was a bit of a Bitcoin SV tradition at the time that new users, people would send them a bunch of tips. She actually ended up getting quite a bit of money out of this. And then the next day came to me and said, my balance has gone down. Are people taking their Bitcoins back? Or are people stealing from my wallet? And it turned out it was just it's a wallet that just happened to display your Bitcoin balance in your local currency by looking at an exchange rate. So it's a classic example of that. Fortunately, you know, she was around 50 or 60 people that could explain what was going on to her. So, if that was my mother, and she's on the other side of the world, so she wouldn't have been able to ring me at the time, I can imagine what she would have thought. Yeah. So I'm going to start this one with David, because your business is more obviously in the creative space, and this is not really about blockchain per se. It's more about building a business. And then what is the role of creativity in designing and building a business?
Well, I mean, I guess that's an interesting question. Without, like, if you're not finding problems to solve and solving them, which obviously takes creativity, like, what are you, I mean, either you're just cloning someone else that's already out there and trying to offer a competitive service, or in most cases, like, what brings you value as a company is the fact that you're coming up with innovative solutions or new business models or new marketing, like new ways of tackling the businesses, the problems that you're trying to solve. And in order for your customers to find value in you, obviously you have to be doing something better than the other competitors that are out there. And so creativity, when it comes to really thinking up new ways to solve the different problems that you're offering solutions for to people. Yeah.
Paula, any thoughts?
It was just creativity when creating business. That was the question?
Yeah, it's kind of an abstract question, so I'll let you skip this one if you want to.
I mean, I agree with what he said, and then it's just the problems that come up every day. You got to get creative.
Okay, I'm going to start with this one again with David, because I suspect in your consulting business, you probably deal with people who are already on board in terms of blockchain adoption, I suppose. But David, this is the problem you specifically have to solve, which is how do you turn blockchain skeptics into champions, or not necessarily even champions, but get them over the line of why should I use this blockchain thing?
Yeah, and for I mean, we kind of have two different client bases, and one is the players themselves, and for them, ideally, we don't have to get them over that hump because they don't even know about it or see about it. But for developers building solutions on our platform, yeah, I mean, that becomes a big hurdle in that we really need to make a case of why this is a better business model, why this is better than just building on Google Stadia or something like that for your game development. And I think in that, really getting, preaching the picture of, at least in competitive gaming, which is kind of our focus, of how being able to audit and being able to have regulators audit and your community audit everything that's happened to ensure that we are playing by the rules, to ensure that we are being fair in what we're doing. I mean, everything that we do, every random number that gets introduced, every timestamp that we put on something, we are signing with our Bitcoin keys that says, this is, I am attesting, I am legally accountable to what I am saying with this data that I'm putting out there. And so as far as a consumer trust and also there's a lot of really other cool things you can do with it. But that's one big thing. It's just that the consumers can trust you, the communities can trust you, the regulators can trust you and can audit you. That's a big piece there. Additionally, I lost my additionally. I guess I'll leave it at that right now.
Do you have an additionally, Paula?
Yeah, I guess how you get people in. Yeah, I definitely agree that there's definitely a large portion of the population that you probably like don't have to get in. They're gonna like continue their lives and absorb whatever tech comes their way. But you know, the people that are interested, I think it's definitely going about it with different angles. You know, the finance people, there's obviously, you know, potential gain there. So you get them just to invest. But, you know, you can definitely sector based on what each person is, whether it be the supply chain. Like my mom, she works in pharmaceuticals and I've been working in this for 3 years and she has not been able to like comprehend what's going on until I finally talked about like the supply chain and like the pharmaceutical chain for that. And it was like a light bulb went off in her head and she suddenly could see such an application for blockchain in general. And now she keeps sending me articles randomly on different blockchain applications. But, you know, there is, you know, the smart contracts, or, you know, when I go talk to people in the entertainment industry, I talk about the intellectual property, how maybe it won't be pirated in the future if you had like your movie on the blockchain versus on the regular internet. There's just, there's so many different applications that disperse out that I kind of cater it to that person and why they might be interested.
Actually, it isn't my additionally, but I've got a different additionally. So taking this idea that says, building up the idea that there can be a trust and that this data hasn't been changed, and also auditability, and just adding in the idea of simply attestation that says, when I post something, I'm actually signing that with my keys, allows us to move to a world where things, I mean, our world of you can't trust anything you see, you can't trust anything you hear online, any of that, we start getting the tools to be able to build actual engines around just filtering and trusting data. And so that, I mean, whether it be a social media where someone makes a post that references data that the CDC released, and then other people, I mean, people can start building filtering engines on that starts putting value on different sources of data. And you start getting a lot more information such that you can start leaning out what really are the things that you care about or that you trust in a way that's very different than relying on Twitter's algorithms or Google's algorithms or Facebook's, but really there can start being people who release clients for your phone that will watch this social blockchain and be able to balance how to weight things, how to value things. And that itself there can be lots of different solutions for that. And there can be competing filtering engines. And just having that attestation that says this piece of information is tied to something that can be tied back to a real person or a real organization, and even tying together that this person is a member of this entity or was a member of this entity during the time that this got posted, but then they started posting other stuff after they left that is antithetical to that. Like, you start just getting so much more information in just how things are connected and who people are, that we can really get to a point where the whole idea of who we trust changes completely. And it might still be the algorithm, but it's not their algorithm, it's my algorithm. It's the one that I have chosen to build up, or that I trust this other organization to build up, or there's just a lot more choice at a far more fine-grained level.
Certainly. I deal primarily at the enterprise level of things, talking to very, very large businesses and sometimes government departments. And if I have one take-home message for anyone trying to sell blockchain, is don't mention blockchain. Tell them about the benefits of blockchain and how they can actually, help them do their business. Just bearing in mind that we've got probably quite a lot of developers in the audience who are interested in blockchain, and some of them may well even be new to it. Some may have ideas of their own. Firstly, I'll point out to them, please remember that you can ask questions, and I will put them to the panelists. Stathis, you have asked me a question, and I'm afraid I don't understand what it means. He says, Steve, I think you mentioned a service for websites and their runtime. Could I repeat that, please? So if you want to maybe clarify that, I'll try and get that question answered. But for those developers in the room that might have the next big idea, I think you've probably both been through this yourselves. You've got the big idea. What do you do with it? What's the next step to turn that into something real? Paula.
Well, I mean, my first step when I thought of my big idea was Google how to start a business. But then, I mean, is this just a generic, like, how to start an idea?
I think so. Yeah. You've been there before, so.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I resonated with what he said. Like, starting a business is creative. It is a lot of problem solving. So for me, it was, step one, create it, or start the company. Step B, figure out, what we need, what are the basic things that we need to get to a sustainable level, and what can we do different than our competitors, what can we do better. And it's a lot of trial by error, but that's okay. Everybody's kind of faking it till they make it. So yeah, for me, it was just like, not so much like, don't be afraid to fail, and Google's there to answer any question that you may have on your journey. So I don't have a very concrete answer, because I think everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. But I think it's just being ready to figure out any problem that comes up.
I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't a Google.
Yeah, I don't know what I do.
I had to go to the old library and flick through card catalogs. But, we have Google now, and in 10, 20 years, we might even have a Bitcoin or blockchain Google. David, you've been through this process yourself. What was the seed of Kronoverse, and how it kind of evolved from there?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't know that I'm going to say that this story is necessarily the way that everyone should be doing it, but Kronoverse as a business idea isn't where we started. We started very much with crypto fights as a very rudimentary idea of a game on the blockchain. And my personal route to that was basically, I got super obsessed with blockchain, cryptocurrency, all this stuff, to the point where, and my old company, I had started 9 years before, and I was just running out of steam on it. And so I just kind of jumped in head first, and I had a small exit from my old company that was able to pay me to live for a couple years while I started playing around. But at the same time, that was the only money I had for long-term savings. So there was kind of like, this has to turn into something or I need to shift gears. And so I just jumped head first and started building, started researching, starting to figure out what we could do as a product. And with us, like Crypto Fights this is something Adam, our CEO, was already starting to think about, and he was looking for resources to kind of help him. And so I jumped into that, and then we spent a couple months on it as an employee. And then I'm like, no, this is something. Let's just build this toward an investment toward what we're going to start and make a company out of it. So it was a really fulfilling yet very stressful process, because essentially every month that we're not making money or we don't have some sort of funding is a month less of money I have to retire on or to. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of risk of just jumping and go with it. But if you have a passion for what you're doing, which is, at least for me, that's been a huge motivation of, I mean, this is what I'm thinking about when I'm not at work. And so this might as well just be my work and it's pretty much turned into, for the most part, my life I mean, my best friends are all people that I know in the Bitcoin community and that I see once a year at a conference somewhere, but we talk online or we talk through kind of new potential ways that we can handle distributed state caching and just all sorts of cool, nerdy endeavors.
And I'd echo one sentiment, and I hate to sound like a motivational speaker, but really don't be afraid of failure. Every failure is actually a lesson learned that brings you one step closer to the ultimate success. So we're approaching the end of our time slot, so I've only got time for a couple more questions. One serious one, and then one warm and fuzzy. Actually, we have an audience question, which is very similar to the question I was about to ask, which was how do you try to get into regulated industries with blockchain? And I'll give you the choice. My own question was more of an ideological one, which is, or maybe a pragmatic one, actually. Should you regulate blockchain? Paula?
You know, I think it would be a mildly unpopular opinion in certain circles of blockchain. But I do think there like some form of regulation is probably necessary just to, you know, protect against certain, you know, I could talk about some really like unfortunate behaviors that could occur on the blockchain. I don't know if I want to talk about them, but I do think there needs to be some general guideline and, you know, I mean, I guess, yeah, not putting out like hits on people, like on the voting, like, yeah, like that shouldn't be allowed. That should be regulated. I don't want a world where that is the case. But yeah, I mean, it is a really hard industry to regulate because, you know, it is so fast moving, it's everywhere, it's still a little hard to understand. But I forget what the audience question is. I'm sorry. What was it exactly again?
How would you try to get into heavily regulated industries with blockchain? So I imagine things like
very carefully, like you know, with probably a decent amount of legal fees. Like yeah, you definitely need some form of compliance and legal check if you want to get into the more you know, specific areas, gray areas.
I think I'd take a pragmatic approach in that it's inevitable. People thought that the internet was going to be the Wild West once upon a time, and it took 10, 20 years, but eventually the government managed to figure out how to regulate it. And whether that's a good or a bad thing is an open question for debate, I suppose. But it does mean that some of the more nefarious activities are not necessarily gone, but they're harder to sort of, you know, carry anonymously. And people that have children that are worried about being on the internet, I suppose that makes them feel better. People who you know, want ultimate perfect freedom, that makes them feel worse. But Yeah, my pragmatic approach is it's there, whether you like it or not. It's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is similar to my approach to patents. They exist, so it doesn't actually matter whether I like them or hate them. I'm subject to the environment that's created by a world that has a patent system. David, do you have any thoughts on?
I mean, pretty much. I was going to earn some Steve Shadders cookies because I was basically going to say the exact same thing. As should it be regulated? I don't know. Probably some areas yes. Probably many areas no. I tend to be a less regulation, but does that mean it won't be? No, it's going to be, and largely a lot of the regulations that are out there actually are technology agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's a blockchain or if it's whatever. These are regulations that already exist. I mean, if we're going to do skill-based gaming in our world and that's legal in 42 US states, well, we need to make sure that we're not doing skill-based gaming for money in those other 8 states, because if we do, we're out of compliance with the law. It doesn't matter that we're running on a blockchain or not. The definition of our business is regulated, or there is regulation around it that we have to comply with, or else we're liable.
Yeah, this is the pragmatic approach that I actually see in any serious business that's looking at doing something with blockchain. And I actually don't need to hold a personal opinion about it to make a decision about how I'm going to approach it, because if I want to do business with people in the financial space or in the gaming space or in the the healthcare space, for example, providing them solutions that make compliance feasible for them is not actually even an option. So yeah, all right. Well, I think we'll close, like I said, with a bit more of a warm and fuzzy question. And I guess this is the pick your ideology question, if you want to lay the cards on the table. But what are some of the biggest social challenges that you think that blockchain is best suited to address? We talked a lot about business, but I'm a big fan of saying that the incentive model of Bitcoin is fundamentally built on the idea that it incentivizes honest behavior. It makes honest behavior the path of least resistance, and it makes it easier for people to be better to each other, simply because they'll be rewarded for doing so. It doesn't require altruism. It doesn't require nobility of purpose. It's just what actually gets you the best outcome. And I don't know if that's an indictment on humanity that we need a system like that, or that someone invented a system like that because they thought that was a way to make the world a better place. But it's there, and I think that's a noble purpose. So I think anyone who's around blockchain for long enough has probably thought about how it's going to change the world and what the world might look like in 20 years' time as a result of Bitcoin adoption. So I see Paula nodding there, so I'm going to pick on you first for an answer. Sure.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I found most exciting when I first got into the blockchain space is just how much it, especially back when I got in, how much it really didn't care where you were from. Everybody can interact with the blockchain for the most part on a same playing field. It allows people from, the remotest parts of like Africa to, invest in tokens. I mean, maybe they lose, but like, they can play a part in the economic potential gain. Or, there is, like, I'm a bit of a globalist. So I really like that it does bring in international business, international from anywhere, investments. The open source technology can allow like smaller companies with less funds to kind of jump into an existing framework and build off of it. There's social good aspects. Like if you have a nonprofit who's putting their payments on the blockchain, you can verify that that nonprofit is donating as much money as they say they will to the fund that you want to promote versus, keeping 90% of it. So there's so many different applications, but I really think, and then there's the obvious, companies that maybe have failing governments, they can save their money in a stable coin, or escape a little bit from maybe what's going on locally for them. So I really would love to see a world where it doesn't get so regulated and so split up that changes. But I would love if it continues to be a place where everybody can interact quite freely.
Yeah,
But
I think
aside from everyone playing more games and being happy for the fact.
I think, I mean, on top of just the social attestation aspects I mentioned earlier, where essentially you can build up trust in, or essentially there can be provable identity, not that I know that you are Steve Shadders and I know your address, but that I know that your entity that you have online has behaved in certain ways in its past. Or if you don't reveal that information, or if you don't tie your history to where you are now, well, then there's nothing that actually gives, essentially your weighting can go way down because I don't have any history on you. So we start to this point where we can start valuing people in a measurable way. But then I think the other big thing is, I mean, if you look at the move toward the gig economy in the last decade of the Uber and the Grubhubs and the, like, that world, that ability that says, I've got a car and I'm driving for these hours anyway, so I can just put myself to work. Those opportunities just explode when there is opportunities out there for you to just pick up. So one example is there's a system in the Bitcoin SV space called Tonic Pow. That's essentially it's a social marketing tool where companies will put ads out there, and you can, if you have a big social following, just grab those and share them. And as people click through to them, you get the portion that a Google gets right now for serving up ads. And you take that on then a much broader scale. You mentioned BitPing earlier. Like, there ends up being all these opportunities for people who can spend an hour here or there, or can spend a full-time job, whatever, of just like finding opportunities that are out there that will pay them in real time for what they're doing. And it really unlocks the kind of the ability for individuals to be small businesses and to kind of make their own way in life without necessarily clocking in 9 to 5 for someone else. It's just, okay, if you can search the internet for these opportunities and find what's out there, and you can do the service and you can get paid for it. I mean, on a whole global scale, that alone there has potential to raise third world countries and populations greatly in just how they can live their lives, because there's no gatekeepers for that kind of stuff. It really is, you find the opportunity, you deliver the service, and you're paid immediately. And the measurement of how good of a job you did isn't really based on what some manager thinks of it. It literally is, did you complete the terms of what's being asked of you? And if you did, the code just says, okay, you matched it, here's your money. There isn't the intermediaries to kind of gum up the works.
If there was one word that I could choose to summarize what I think that Bitcoin can do for the world, I think it is actually opportunity, and I think that's a good word to end on. So I'd like to thank Paula and David for sharing their thoughts with us today, and we'll be back in a few moments to delve into